All right, so let's go to the second graph, which I think shows what we've replaced the idea of a public higher education as a public investment in the potential of the student. This is tuition at the UW comprehensive campuses like UW Superior in constant $2011. This excludes fees, this excludes differential tuitions, this is just the base tuition in constant dollars, factoring in inflation. In other words, if inflation was 5% a year and tuition went up 5% a year, the line would be flat. So in today's dollars, in 1967, you had to pay about $1,600 to go to school at UW Superior. Today, it's up to $6,000, and when I was hired in 1994, it was just about $3,000. So even since I've been here, it's doubled. It's doubled. What I think this graph really shows is that we've transformed higher education in this state from a public investment in the individual into a commodity that is purchased by the individual. It's a fundamentally different model of higher education. That a UW Superior education has now become a commodity that the individual purchases from the university system. It's not an investment in the individual by the university system and by the state. All right, next graph. It's actually worse than that shows because, of course, over the last 30 or 40 years, wages have not kept pace even with inflation in this country, especially on the low end of the labor market. This is UW tuition divided by the minimum wage. Now, of course, most of our students earn a little bit more than minimum wage, but it's a pretty good proxy because wages on the lower end of the labor market tend to track the trend of the minimum wage pretty closely. So the short version of this is that, in practical terms, what it means is compared to the early 1970s, our students have to work 4 times as many hours in a year to pay for their education as people did in the 70s. All right. And this actually answers the question, if it is a private commodity, how do our students purchase this commodity? Well, one way you purchase it is working so many hours you can't be a student. But you have to work all those hours or you can't be a student. Right? Well, what about financially? Let's take a look at Pell Grants. This is the maximum Pell Grant divided by the cost of going to school at UW campus. Again, this excludes differential tuitions and student fees. When the Pell Grant program was started, the maximum Pell Grant was about 2.5 times the tuition of a UW campus. And today, it doesn't even quite meet the cost of tuition going here, let alone all your other expenses. And of course, since wages don't keep pace with tuition, since Pell Grants don't keep pace with tuition, since tuition is going up faster than inflation, we all know increasingly how students finance their education. They either work like demons, or they take out ungodly amounts of loans, or they do both. The way I would suggest we think about this is that we have a new model where you purchase an education the same way you buy a home. It's an investment, but it's no longer a public investment in the individual, it's an individual's investment in themselves. The same way buying a house is considered an investment, you now purchase an education like an investment and you finance it the way you buy a house. You basically take out a mortgage to go to college. But the amount of outstanding student debt in this country is now greater than the amount of outstanding credit card debt in this country. So, what does this mean for us? Well, we've been told that the way to respond to this new reality is that we all need to become more entrepreneurial and more market-oriented. And that's fine, but if you step back and think about it, I hate to tell us that that is essentially doomed to failure. That's doomed to failure for a simple reason. There is no sustainable market for what we do here. If the only way that students can purchase an education for us is by working themselves to death and taking out unsustainable levels of debt, that is an unsustainable model of a market. We all saw what happened to the housing market when it was based on unsustainable debt levels. If we replicate the housing market and use that as a metaphor for higher education, it's not sustainable. And it's not sustainable for the simple reason that what we do doesn't have a short-term market value. It has a value, but what we do has a public value, not a market value. There's not a sustainable market to provide education to individuals of limited means if it's viewed as an individual investment. So there is no sustainable market for what we do. And so what all of these formerly public institutions that are being privatized will be doing will be fighting each other for that very, very limited market of students who can self-finance their own educations. And there's not enough of them to go around for all of us. So I want to be really blunt here, and the first part of my message may seem like a real downer, but I think we have to confront reality. And that is, if we lose our belief in the existence of a public good, we're doomed. We are. I want to be clear about this. If we lose our belief in the existence of a public good, we're doomed, because in the absence of a public good, there is no reason for this place to exist. If there is no public good, UW Superior should be shut down, because there's no market for what we do. I think we need to be honest about that. No matter how entrepreneurial and market-oriented we are, if there is no such thing as a public good, this place should be shut down as an inefficient, unsustainable business enterprise. But we're not doomed. We're not doomed because the future is unwritten. We're not doomed to lose the idea of a public good. Here's what I suggest we need to do. And then Jenice and Ben are going to talk a little bit about what this means in practical terms for those of us who work and study here. We have to write our own future. Our future has been... Can you go back a second to the one with the tax funding system? Our future has been written for us by others. And those who've been writing our futures are dooming us to oblivion. We have to write our own future, and to me it's pretty simple how we do that. In practice it'll be tough, but I think the basic idea is simple. We have to proudly assert and boldly assert the public value of what we do. If we try to make a case for what we do on the basis of market values, we're doomed to fail, because we can't. We have to boldly and proudly assert the public value of what we do. What we do here is we develop the human potential of the people of this state. And that has value, and we should proudly and boldly proclaim that and champion that idea. And to me, that is the only salvation for institutions like this. Thanks, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben.